Today we have with us Ms. Ankita Aggarwal in the campus of Indian Institute of Public Administration, IIPA, New Delhi. She has secured All India rank 2 in the Civil Service Examination 2021. Hearty congratulations to you, Ankita. On behalf of IIPA and on my own behalf, I welcome you. I'm sure you have made your parents and your teachers and everybody around you proud of you. You introduce yourself.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to IIPA for having me. By a way of introduction, I was born and brought up in Kolkata in West Bengal, from where I did my schooling till class 12. Post that, I did a BA Honours in Economics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi University. After that, I worked for a year at a social consultancy firm, Dalberg Advisors. Post that, I started preparing for the civil services examination. In my first attempt, I was allotted the Indian Revenue Service, Customs and Indirect Taxes. Then in my third attempt, I have been allotted the Indian Administrative Service. Sir, I have a younger brother at home, and I live in a joint family in Kolkata. And I really enjoy reading books of all varieties.
So that's your hobby.
Yeah.
What kind of suggestion you would like to give for the preliminary examination, which consists of the two paper, one is the GS, other is the CSE?
For prelims, I would say that prelims is the most uncertain stage of this examination because of the sheer numbers that give this exam. So if around 10 lakh students appear for a preliminary exam, only about 10,000 students make it to the mains stage. So the elimination ratio is very high. That is something that should always be remembered about the preliminary stage. And in the preliminary examination, one's aim, given the pattern of the paper for the last few years, where the questions have become very uncertain. Earlier, you could tell that there were a few sources, and from those, most questions could be answered. But that has not been the case for at least 3-4 years now. So one of the ways that worked for me in getting a decent score in my preliminary examination was to attempt as many questions as possible. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to eliminate as many options as possible. Now, I don't know if there is a foolproof strategy, but what worked for me was to have read extensively for my preliminary examination. So I always say that one of the biggest difference between prelims and mains is that if mains is about recollection, because you have to actively recollect what you've read, prelims is about just recognition, just to be able to understand that this option just does not seem to be correct. There is some latent memory of yours that sparks when you see a wrong or a right option. Sometimes candidates are not even able to tell why is it that they know that a certain option is wrong or right. They just know. And that is because of some latent memory that they have of something that they've read. So you read extensively, and the way I read, and this fortunately or unfortunately happens with more attempts. The more attempts you've given at this exam, the more your storehouse of knowledge has increased. So that is one way, but that is obviously not the best way. Nobody wants to be able to give this exam more than once. So one of the things that I did over my subsequent attempts is I wrote a lot of tests, just a lot of tests, not just full length tests, but also daily tests for at least 3-4 months before prelims. Daily tests which consists of only 10 questions, 15 questions, 20 questions, depending on your own schedule, your own timetable. So when you take these tests, not only do you practice the techniques of elimination, and there are many techniques of elimination that are available all over the internet. Interested candidates should actually look at these techniques. But also when you give these tests, when you solve them, the institutes, they will generally give you a little bit of background material related to every question. So that itself gives you a very diverse set of content to study. So you just have to read the content at least 3-4 times before your preliminary. You don't have to by heart it. Don't even attempt to by heart it, because that is not possible. Just read a diverse range of content multiple times before your preliminary, and have confidence. That is also really important if you want to attempt more questions in prelims. And I'm only talking about paper 1 right now.
Yes.
So I think that is something that I think worked for me and can work for others. But I just have to say that this the first stage is very uncertain, and there is a lot that can go right and wrong. So candidates should strategize as they see fit, but this is what I think worked for me.
You said that recognition and recollection. So that is the basic difference between the preliminary and the main. Okay, main we talk a little later. Now preliminary, what are the sources? Because you find many candidates, the aspirant, they get slightly confused and mixed up what sources they should depend on, because some people say very limited study but extensive study. So what's your thought? What was your strategy for this?
So sources, books,
Yes.
resources for prelims. There are these basic resources for books that everybody refers to. Suppose for history, there is the Spectrum book. So I have prepared an extensive list which I can share with the
Okay,
institute,
sure.
and it can be added. But I would like to say for preliminary, I don't think the limiting of sources is a very good idea. As I mentioned in my previous answer, because there's a diverse range of questions that are being asked now. So, other than just the basic books that candidates are supposed to study, they should also study current affairs from, I would say, 2 newspapers and one or two monthly or daily news and news analysis or news condensation that a lot of these coaching institutes give online. I refer to Insights IAS, and I read the Indian Express and the Hindu. Monthly magazine, I did Vision IAS. So this current affairs is also really important. Lastly, is our test series. You should start doing test series at least 3 to 4 months before your before writing the preliminary examination, and also not just full length test series but also daily test
In the
series
parts,
with like
yes.
10 questions, 20 questions, however
Yeah,
fits your schedule.
and a thematic kind of thing. So
Yes.
those 7 themes are given in the preliminary
Yeah.
syllabus. So you thematically do this. Now this is very interesting. What is the role of the previous year question paper solving? What is your take on that?
Sir, I think previous year questions are really important to understand the kind of questions that UPSC prepares. A lot of people have done actually a lot of extensive study of previous year questions and spotted patterns that these are the kinds of questions that have come. I have not done so, but I have used this analysis. I have gained from it. So I think a Google search on analysis of previous year question papers, I think it will really help, and also just to solve on their own. That has to be done, but also try to analyze what kind of questions UPSC has been asking.
Yeah, that's helpful. Now, in the preliminary, as you said, the GS1 and then CSET. Of course, you write the main only when you are above the cutoff. But then there is another CSET, which though there is no cutoff as such, but only 33%. That means you have to secure just 66 marks. But still, people just somehow goof up on that. So, what is your suggestion to them, and how to approach the CSET?
So actually, I was a little lucky when it comes to CSAT because I have a background in science and maths, because till class 12 I studied science, and then my graduation was in economics, so I never sort of lost touch with math. So maths has been my strong point since I was in school. So I did not actually have to do much for CSAT. I'll be very honest, but I only I think I only did 1 or 2 past year question papers for CSAT before 2-3 days before the exam.
Okay, well.
So, I mean, I'm lucky that way that for me, it was never that much of a struggle.
Okay, so you are lucky, yes, that, but then any suggestion for those who are not from the mathematics background? So you have to guard against that risk also.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you're not confident about CSAT, there are lots of test series that are there. But one thing I would say is, at least for the English part of the comprehension part of CSAT, I would say stay away from the question papers that coaching institutes set, and revise past year papers when it comes to the comprehension bit, because there's always a lot of disagreement on the answers to the comprehension questions. So just stick to what UPSC says, whatever UPSC
Says.
So stick to UPSC question papers, at least when it comes to comprehension. Maths, of course, the answers are generally, one answer, and there is not
It's a
lot
unique
of-
answer.
Yes.
It cannot be multiple answer.
Yes, there's generally not a lot of disagreement. Sometimes there is, but for maths, sure, you can you can practice from other institutes question papers. But for English, practice PYQs as much as you can. I think practice is actually the only way.
Only key to
Yes.
success.
There are some, I think for maths, there are some formulas and shortcuts that institutes give, and candidates who don't feel comfortable enough should look at those, and also so that, because time then also becomes an issue. The questions then in themselves are not always that difficult. It's also the time. So if you have these shortcuts and these formulas that you can apply, so that will really help with time management.
Okay.
Okay.
And any suggestion that, because this is not a kind of where you have to score a particular, I mean, it's not a competitive in that sense, only you have to cross a certain threshold, that's it. So would you suggest that out of 80, you should not attempt all the 80 question, but selectively, because it is not based on the merit, and if you cross a minimum 27 without any wrong answer, you are still through.
Yes. So for sure, that is actually absolutely correct. You do not, unless you're very, very confident, attempt all the questions. There is a minimum threshold and that you should cover, and a little bit of a buffer. And generally, candidates have two kinds of strategies. One, either they'll focus on maths, and if there is a little bit of a shortfall, they'll attempt a few of the comprehension ones that they're absolutely sure about. And then there are candidates who do the reverse. They'll attempt maximum comprehension if they're weak in the math and logical reasoning portion, and then make up some of that buffer in the maths. So candidates should choose one or the other based on what their strengths are. Yes.
Yeah,
but absolutely no way should you attempt maximize your number of questions. You should just have a minimum and a buffer. That's about it.
Very good. Now, so much about the preliminary. Now, let us move to the main exam. There are 7 papers, including 5 compulsory papers, which count towards your merit. So, of course, 2 optional. Besides this, there are 2 more question papers which do not count towards your merit. That let us leave those. Essay and the GS4. That means the first paper and the 5th paper. I have found and I have analyzed the marks of these, and the coefficient of variation of marks in these 2 papers particularly is much higher compared to the GS1, GS2, GS3. Now, from this piece of information, a question follows which has 2 parts. A, why it happens in the first place, and how the candidate can leverage this piece of information to maximize their marks.
So what you've said is actually, this is something that has anecdotally been said in the aspirant community, that your essay and your ethics, it's said that they give you the maximum return for a given level of preparation. So that is true. So why that is simply because of the fact that for GS1 to GS3, the questions will generally have a specific answer, that you will be expected to write specific points, and you can either, if you write those points, if most of the competitive candidates, they'll write most of those points, and if you go above and beyond a little bit more because of maps, charts, or if you have better examples or better points, you will get slightly more than the rest, maybe 1 or 2 marks. That's about it, or half mark per question. So that's why, because they're more, I wouldn't say very more of a factual nature, but more like answers are, you know what the answer will be. So that's GS1 to 3. But for GS4 and for essay, it's self-explanatory. You don't have a specific kind of essay that examiners are looking for. And these days, with more and more philosophical essays, rather than having essays like Science, Boon or Bane, you don't have any more of those more factual, fact-oriented essays. You have more of these interpretive essays. So there, just what I interpret and what my next person will interpret can be completely different. And hence, if there's such a huge variation in what we write, there is bound to be a huge variation in how we are scored. Similarly, with ethics, there are a lot of these questions on where they give us a quote, and we're asked to interpret that quotation. So there are a lot of these questions where we can bring in our own flavor, as it is said, where we can show how is it that we think, in case studies also. So I think it's just because there is a lot more discretion on what we write, there's obviously a lot more variance in how we're scored. And leveraging this, I think I would start with ethics. Actually, before that, I would say that in both of these papers, a very key way to score well is to be well read, is to have a diversity of interests, to read books, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts, or even watch informative YouTube videos. Nowadays, YouTube is a huge depository of a lot of learning material, put out in a very informative and in a fun way almost. So if you have a diversity of interests, if you're a curious person, you will generally do better in essay and ethics is what I feel. Having said that, and that is something that just takes time to cultivate. So when candidates who are still in college or school ask me that what should I do for UPSC, I said you don't have to prepare right now. You should read more. You should pick up the habit of reading newspapers. You should read more fiction and non-fiction, both about the country and the world. And then particularly for the exam, when you start preparing properly, I think very basic things like having examples for various different subtopics that are given in the syllabus, having quotations for all of these subtopics. And this is something you do throughout the year, because when you read the newspaper, you come across different examples every day. Generally, newspapers have quotations on their editorial page. You can use that. You can just Google it, or if you're reading a book, you can pick up something from that. So, and this is also something candidates can do between their mains and the interview, when they have a lot more free time to prepare. So instead of doing full-time textbook-based preparation, you can do a lot of these, read other books, watch documentaries, things like that. So I think those things help differentiate your answers, quotations, examples, stories, stuff like that for ethics. For ethics also, I think previous year question papers are really important, because I have seen that a lot of
case studies and themes, okay.
A lot of themes get repeated. So, and also sometimes I'm asked, where do you get these quotes from? One is that you just Google them and you keep your eyes open for them as and when throughout your preparation. But also a lot of previous year question papers have quotations. So you can just use those in your answers too. So I think previous year question papers are also really important for ethics. For essay, sir, it's really hard to say what works.
Okay.
Because as I mentioned earlier, my marks have never really corresponded to how I felt they were, but how I felt my essays were. But one thing I would say is that for philosophical essays, what I've always tried to do is I've tried to ground them to a topic that I have knowledge about. So for example, I think this time I did the essay on research being, I don't exactly remember the topic, but research being about...
what is the research but a blind date with knowledge?
Yeah.
Yes.
So then in GS3, you study a lot about research, about science, innovation, and the research ecosystem in India. So I essentially used what I knew about that, and I used that in the essay. I grounded the essay. I did not make it too lofty.
You connected the essay with the GS3.
With GS3.
Because there are a lot of stuff on the science,
yes,
and the innovations and the technology.
Yes.
And then what is the research also involves a lot of technology. And you would say this blind date with the knowledge.
Yes.
So I think that makes a sense. So if you apply yourself, likely to fetch more marks in the essay.
Yes.
And you also made very interesting point, and which I think many aspirants can take a leaf out of your book. And that is because it gives an opportunity to write more creative, because your creativity can be exhibited here. But in GS 1, 2, 3, scope for showing your creativity is rather limited. I'm getting a good sense out of what you say.
Absolutely.
So on this. Now, GS4, for instance, in the year 2021, a civil servant has ethics, nothing else matters. If not, nothing else matters. So there was a question I distinctly remember, what are the 5 ethical traits on which one can plot the performance of a civil servant?
So this question actually completely reflects what I was saying, that this question has come in some form or the other in almost every year.
Really?
Almost every year there'll be a question about the ethical traits that a civil servant needs to display. So I still remember, I think I made a short anagram for this, where there's fairness, there's integrity, there's transparency, there's impartiality, and there's accountability. So this is something that I thought about it because I saw it in the previous year question papers, and then I knew what I will write as soon as I see the question. So I think these are the 5 ethical traits, and for each of these, you need to understand what is it that each of these things mean, not just for the paper, but also for your own self, because you're aspiring to be there on one day. And from the answer point of view, it also helps if you have an example of each of these traits being displayed, both by a public personality, somebody that the world knows, and also if asked, you yourself in what you've done. So these are things that this is something you need to invest in. You invest your time in thinking of examples of a time when you displayed integrity, to think of a public figure who has displayed integrity at some point or the other. So I would generally write of Justice Khanna during the emergency times. So again, this is something that can be expected. This is something that every candidate should be prepared with. And this is not something new that I'm saying. This is something that has been said by aspirants and successful candidates over the years. That there are certain things, trends that you can pick up from ethics papers, and you should just, at least those things you should have a handle on. You should know that, okay, this is something I'm expected to know.
Yeah. So a corollary of what you say, the candidate must prepare the repository of nice philosophical notes, anecdotes, and things like that beforehand, because in the civil service examination, the UPSC expects you to write 4,000 words in just 180 minutes, except the essay paper where just 2,400 will be good enough. That means 23 words per minute, including thinking time. Obviously, you will not get any time to think because that will be a luxury. So obviously, those successful candidates like yourself must have prepared beforehand and repeatedly must have mastered the art of repeating and memorizing to a great extent. Did you do that?
Yes, so to be able to finish my paper, that is actually one of my biggest hurdles in this exam in my first and second attempt. So there are three things that you do. One is you practice. You just practice writing for 3 hours, because not only is it a exercise, mental exercise, it's also physically very strenuous.
Grueling, yes, and strenuous.
For 3 years to be, for 3 hours to be just writing at your top speed. And I would have a skin tape around one of my fingers, because this one would start to,
hurt you?
Because of the friction, the skin would start to burn after a point. So to avoid contact with the skin, I would have a skin tape. So things like this is
on
something
just
I
one
discovered.
finger, or
no, just this one finger. This is how I mean, it's just how I
it
write.
depends on, because some people use this one, some people use this. Okay.
So however you when you practice at home, you detect these physical discomforts that your body might be facing, and then you can work on that so that it doesn't actually affect you on the day of the exam. So this is something I discovered in my first attempt, and I bought a skin tape and I used to put it in my finger. So you just practice at home. That is, I think, one thing that's really important. Second is, again, you need to recall, and you need to recall fast. And for that, you need to revise multiple times. So you make really crisp notes that can be revised even the day before this exam or a week before the exam. So your notes should always be geared towards your revision. You should know that, okay, and I used to make my notes online digitally. So I would highlight parts that I have to read or make them bold so that I don't have to read this entire text. Thirdly, and it's related to my first point about practicing, in college and school, when we write full sentences. We write proper sentences.
Grammatically correct. And
exactly. But that is just not possible for at least the general studies papers. So you learn to write in bullet points. You learn to write very short sentences, and you don't even write full sentences. And that just comes with practice.
Like railway stop, bull chain. That's it.
Yes, that's it. And so that's why you focus a lot on keywords. You focus a lot on underlining, so that in less words you can convey your message. A lot of candidates make flowcharts and diagrams, so that, because that takes lesser time than actually just writing the same concept out. So these are a few things, and honestly, just practice and work on. Candidates have very specific styles of attempting the paper. Some start with the 10 markers, some start with the 15 markers, some start from the beginning, some start from the end. So when you practice, you figure out what is it that works for you. Whether you're more efficient at the beginning, whether you're more efficient at the last hour, whether you're best at the middle. So these are things that differ from candidate to candidate, and only when you practice at home will you realize what is it that works best for you, and then you can implement that in this exam.
So now again, the GS4, that ethics, integrity, and aptitude. So, and there are section A where about 13 questions and then 6 case study. This is the standard pattern by and large. So, what you suggest candidate should attend first the section A, which gives the kind of theoretical thing, and section B involves a kind of novelty because each case study is different, and those are 6, but they each of that carries higher marks compared to the section A question. So, how do you distribute and the ordering of the priority?
So my take on this has generally been different from what the larger community, aspirant community does. I generally did it chronologically. I started with section,
that means section A,
finished it, and then went to section B.
So all 13 questions first, and then you take the section B.
Yes, and the reason for that is I genuinely believe that the first impression that you make on the examiner is a very strong, is something that really sticks with the examiner. So if your first few questions are well done, the examiner will probably not do it knowingly, but somewhere in the back of his, subconsciously they'll think that okay, you know your stuff, you know the content, you know you're a well prepared candidate. So as you move ahead, I believe the marking becomes a little more in your favor. Like you get the benefit of doubt if at all that situation arises. This is something that I believe in based on based on actually nothing. It's not something that I can empirically prove, but this is something that I feel has worked. Intuitively, I feel like this is something that has worked for me. So that's why I always start my questions mostly chronologically. Give my best in the first few answers, because if you come back to it at the end, you might run out of time and you might not be able to give your best. I also believe that I feel this personally, that the first section A questions require a lot more thinking than section B for me personally. So that requires time. But for section B, because it's a case study, it came to me very quickly. Like I did not have to spend a lot of time thinking of okay, what are the alternatives,
stakeholders, and what are the course of
there are certain frameworks that you know that you have to put. So I felt that I could attempt case studies even if there is a paucity of time, but my mind did not work well in section A if there is a paucity of time. So this is again something that I discovered as I practiced the papers.
Okay.
It differs from candidate to candidate. Most candidates do.
You obviously will tell your experience. Now, extending your own argument to this, because if you believe in the primacy, that means you are attempting good question in the beginning so that you get an impression on the examiner. By the same logic, don't you think the lasting impact is also very important? So you attempt the last question also thereafter. So primacy and recency. The when he is almost completing giving you marks, so the last question should also be of the top level. So he will assume intermediate must have been gone. Well, all right.
No, I actually that makes perfect sense. So I would say that I tried to manage my time well enough that it's not as if by the end of it I'm absolutely out of time and I'm completing a 15-mark question in 5 minutes. That was something that I didn't want happening.
So you allocated your time across the question in a judicious fashion, so that you are not running out of steam and out of time. So that is there. So you consciously distributed the time, and so enough for the last also. That's fair enough. Now coming to GS, because we have discussed the 2 papers out of 5 of the compulsory section, there was one question: what are the socio-economic implication of IT industry in the big cities of the country? So what is your take on this?
Yes, sir. So I would say that I was helped in answering this question because a similar question had come in a previous year question in GS1 itself. So that's why I always say that previous year questions are really important, because sometimes the theme at least gets repeated again and again. So in order to tackle this question, I generally would divide my answer in structurally logical fashion. So because the question asks for socio-economic implications, there's both social and then there's economic. So I made different headings for that.
Social
implications and economic implications. I do that because it helps me think. It helps me come up with points faster. If I'm like, okay, let's think of social, and then I'm like, okay, let's think of economic. I also think it helps the examiner mark you better, because now the examiner knows that, okay, you've thought about this separately, instead of everything being bunched together. And so social implications, again, there are positive and negative. So in terms of positive implication is that these areas become a lot more cosmopolitan. So there's a lot of exchange of cultural ideas. And so one of the examples is you get a lot of diverse cuisines in these areas now, because there are people from various parts of countries who are working in the same space. A negative implication would be that xenophobic tendencies might increase, that the locals might feel pushed out of certain economic spaces. And then I distinctly remember giving the example of people from Nagaland being discriminated against in Bengaluru and had to leave the city at a certain point in this decade. So this example, this is something that I would believe help me differentiate my answer, because this point would be given by everybody, but to substantiate this point by giving a real life example of something that has happened in an IT hub in India, I think that that helps. And I could do this because I had practiced this answer before, because the previous year question was there. Similarly, economic implication positive is that it creates a lot of economic opportunities. It sends money back to tier 2, tier 3 towns. It creates a lot of service sector jobs. For example, the whole Uberization phenomena that has happened because we have a lot of young working professionals in the cities who really do not have the time to do a lot of their housework, a lot of housework related things, and they're living single or they're living in nuclear families. So that creates these economic opportunities, but they have the resources, so it creates economic opportunities in this sector. Negative economic implications would be, again, cost of living increases for the locals, land prices increases for the locals, they might be dispossessed of their lands, etc. So this is how I would structure my answer and structure my thinking also.
Yeah, you made very important point, because in the question it was the socio-economic implication, but again you dissected that and put in 2 subheading, and that I think I can imagine that the examiner willy-nilly will give more marks, because then you have 2 subheading. I mean, there are 2 ways to handle this. One is socio-economic, bundle it together, and other is to disaggregate and then give this. And I assume the examiner will be tempted to give at least half or 1 mark more, and that makes a hell of difference, because there are almost 19-20 questions, and if you get half marks in each question extra, that means 10 marks, and 7 paper, 7 into 10, 70 marks makes a hell of difference. So I think this is a very good strategy for dividing the question into different subsections. That's very interesting point. You have flagged it. And let us move to the GS2 paper. There was one, can the civil society and the non-government organization present an alternative model for the benefit of the common citizen? And if yes, what are the challenges that they offer for providing an alternative model to the government?
Okay, so this was a very good question, and I think I generally enjoy when we get questions that we don't really expect, because it challenges you to think on the spot. And the way to tackle this question, I think, is to so NGOs and civil society is a particular part of our syllabus in GS2. So anybody who's prepared seriously would have studied what are the good NGOs that are there, what is the work that they're doing. They would have examples of that, and they would have notes on what are the positives of NGOs and what are the negatives of the work that NGOs do. So this is something you will have. Now you have to think, how do I use this to answer this question? So generally, when there are these questions which are not known, when you don't really know in advance, where you've not really prepared exactly such a question, so you try to tell yourself a story and you try to tell the examiner a story, because that's how you also think and that's how you can help the examiner see what you're thinking. So you begin with, I would begin with defining just NGOs and civil societies, which again any serious aspirant will know, just defining. And then you say that there are a number of NGOs that work in the public delivery space, so suppose public service delivery space. So one of them would be, say, Pratham Educational Organization. It runs a lot of school programs in the country. Then there's Sulabh International, which runs public toilets. So there. And then you write the positives of such a system is And then you just write what are the positives of NGOs working. The fact that they're flexible, they can do a lot more with their funds with a lot less delay because there's a lot less accountability in terms of public finance.
And more discretion.
More discretion. So you can try a lot of new things. A lot of new experiments can be tried that the government might find it difficult to do simply because of the structure of how things work. So these are the positives. And then the negatives, again, this is something we all know. There's a lack of accountability for NGOs. Then the spatial reach of NGOs is nowhere as close to what it is for the governments. People can directly influence what governments do, but they cannot do that for NGOs because NGOs are also beholden to their board members, etc., etc. So there are all of these things that candidates will already know, but then to fit them in this answer is something that you have to think about, and if possible mention examples. Suppose a lot of one example could be that NGOs are generally found in working in developed states a lot more than underdeveloped states because they have access to CSR money more in those states. So then that means what happens to the people of other states if government secedes from public service delivery and NGOs take over that space. So then you write a way forward. So I think what I wrote was that NGOs should play to their strengths, as in they should experiment a lot more with what works, and then the government can scale that up. And a good example of that is Pratham's teaching at the right level model. Pratham innovated this model, and this is something that has been taken up by governments across the state. And I would like to say that I know this because I worked at Pratham. I interned at Pratham while I was still at college.
Okay, so
which is why I tell candidates that do these things. Diversify what you do. There is a lot to learn outside of books, and it helps you create a plan B for yourself.
Right.
Because I interned at these places, I knew what I could do if I didn't clear this exam.
I mean, you have given a new tangent to the answer, and therefore it stood out. Now, moving to the GS3 paper, there was another relating to water is the most precious natural resource. How and to what extent the water crisis can be solved by micro irrigation? What's your take on this?
This is a very straightforward answer, as generally GS3 questions are, and irrigation is one of the subtopics in our syllabus, which is why reading the syllabus thoroughly is very important. So any serious aspirant who will see that irrigation, types of irrigation is a syllabus topic, they will have made notes on various techniques of irrigation, tank irrigation, lift irrigation, and then micro irrigation being one of them. And I had, very simply you start by introducing micro irrigation. You say that micro irrigation, what is micro irrigation, then types of micro irrigation like drip, sprinkler irrigation. Then you can also give a data point saying this percentage of India's cultivated area is covered by micro irrigation. And then you talk about what are the benefits, because they're saying how and to what extent, which means they're also asking you to examine how far can micro irrigation even be taken? Is it really a solution? So you talk about the benefits of micro irrigation. You save water. You prevent soil erosion. It's good for horticultural crops, for contract farming, because there's a lot more precision when you do micro irrigation. So this is something that I read, that because there's a lot more precision. So when companies want a certain kind of quality in your crop, this is something that you do. But there are downsides to this. One of them being that the investment required is just too much, and given the size of land holdings in our country, that is something that might not be economically feasible for most farmers.
86% are the small and marginal farmers. Yes,
exactly. So, and then there are things like shortage of staff that can maintain and repair the irrigation. The shortage of that engineering talent in our rural areas, particularly. So there are all of these things that you study when you study micro irrigation when you're doing your preparation, and then you conclude by talking about the micro irrigation scheme, more crop per drop scheme of the government of India, and how that can be implemented better. So that becomes your conclusion and your way forward.
So in this particular question, will giving the international experience will enrich your answer? So I mean that also could be a new dimension to this question that can also be attempted. So far we have discussed about the 2 papers of the preliminary and 5 compulsory papers of the main. Now that leaves us 2 optional papers of the main exam. So you said PSIR, that And why did you choose that? Because that's not your paper, the subject which you studied at graduation. And how did you allocate the time between 7 papers across optional and those compulsory?
So the reason I chose political science and international relations was, one reason was that I wanted a topic, a subject that could keep my interest in this preparation, keep that fire burning. And I felt like, and I always was interested in political science. I did an elective paper in political science in college also. So I had an interest. So I thought if I chose a new subject, it would keep my interest, because the preparation process is so long, it can get tedious. So you do everything you can do to ward off boredom. So that was one reason. Another big reason was there is a huge overlap between the political science and international relations paper and between the GS papers across all 4 papers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it also helps in the essay paper.
Okay.
So that was a big incentive. Third, I'd heard that there's a lot of guidance available for this optional. Yes. So I thought, okay, then this is something that can work for me.
Oh.
And about time allocation, I would say in my first attempt, there was a little bit of an issue because I decided very late and I started coaching only in December of 2018, and I was supposed to appear for prelims in 2019 May. So I only had 3-4 months of PSI preparation, and all I did there was attend coaching and revise my notes. I did not really have time to self-study. My time of studying only came after my prelims, for the 1 month after prelims, and at that point that PSI was actually a lifesaver for me, because I was not sure if I'll clear prelims. My cutoff, I was very close to the expected cutoff. My prelims scored in my first attempt. So because it was a new paper that I was doing, it kept me interested.
You were able to keep the wolf at bay.
So time management is an issue, but I would say that for candidates, I would say that distribute your time equally between GS and PS and your optional.
Okay.
Because actually, I would say that depends on your optional. For some people, they've already done their optional as graduation subjects in college, so they might need to spend a little less time than others. So it depends on you, how comfortable you are, how confident you are about your optional. Because some optionals, suppose mathematics, if you work really hard, the chances of scoring really well are very high. Whereas for humanities related optionals, that might not be the case. Even if you've put in a lot of work, you might not get a good score. So then you have to hedge your bets and also contribute to GS equally well. So then it depends on your optional, your comfort level, your background, everything.
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to analyze the marks secured by a candidate not only this year, and then I found very few people, you can count on fingertips, who have secured more than 870 marks. What differently you did this time to secure such a high marks in?
So sir, I think what worked for me in my final attempt is that I tried to learn from my mistakes of my previous 2 attempts. In my first attempt, I was just short on time, in the sense a lot of topics I was not able to cover very well. So I tried to improve that in my second attempt, but in my second attempt, I made the mistake of not realizing that now that I've studied a lot more, I have a lot less time to put down that content on paper. So I mismanaged my time in my second attempt, and in my third attempt, I've learned that okay, now I have more content prepared, I'm better prepared for writing the answers, and I also know how I need to manage my time while writing the answer. And I think that's actually about it, because there was not a lot of time between my second and third attempt. So content addition anyway is not a very good idea that much, because your content needs to be limited because your time is limited. So from first to second, I filled the gaps in my preparation. And from second to third, I try to manage my time better by revising more, writing shorter answers and things.
And recollecting.
And
which is possible only when you revise multiple times. So I think this is very important feedback for the future aspirant. This is one thing basically you said, that you have to increase your ability to recollect, make your points very crisp and practice it so that you can contain those recollection within the allocated time. So those are the three mantra, if I correctly understood you. So this is so Ankita. We now discuss our main exam and the preliminary. Now let us move to the interview. So this interview process start from this year, from 5th April and went up to 26th May. That means almost 52 days. So some people are called on 5th April, and obviously some are 26th May also. So what do you think? I mean, of course, you have no control on which date UPSC invites you, but which is more beneficial from the candidate's perspective? Just out of curiosity.
I think somewhere in the middle would be the best. It depends on your temperament also and your circumstances. For instance, because my interview was towards the end and I was in training, so I would feel that it would be better had my interview been at the beginning, because I did not have a lot of time during my training to prepare for the interview. So, but the stress was still there, that I have to prepare, but I'm also not getting the time. So I felt like if it was done in the beginning, at least I would be able to give my best to my training. So it depends on your temperament. For some people, having it at the end is better because they feel like they'll have less anxiety of the final result. They'll have less time to dwell upon that. But I would say in the middle path is generally the best. You have time to prepare.
Is the golden path.
Yes.
Middle path is the golden path. That's so. Now, just for the benefit of aspirant, if I can divide the interview of about 30 to 35 minutes, it can be divided into three parts. A will be dealing with the DAF, your detailed application form, and second will be the opinion-based question, and third will be based on your facts. How it was divided the time? The interview board divided into three portions, if you can recollect.
So there's actually never
occurred to you?
I've never really thought about this, and also I think there are a lot of overlaps between these categories. So suppose I was asked a lot of questions on economics in my third interview, but in the economics questions come from my DAF also, because I have my graduation was in economics. It also falls under opinion-based questions because you're asked your opinion on various economic policies, etc. But it also comes under facts, because you can't give an answer on economics without having to resort to certain facts. So I felt like my interview was very balanced in that sense. There weren't that many factual questions. There were questions from my DAF. I was asked about my work experience, and there were opinion-based questions also. So for my interview, I think it was pretty much balanced.
So what all the questions you can recall were on expected lines, or they were some kind of shockers or some kind of unexpected questions, and there must have been some question which made you very comfortable, because you might have thought, okay, this is my forte, I can answer very confidently. There may be some questions which may not be so comfortable, and then you have to think a lot, and sometimes it makes you nervous also. You are a human being, everybody becomes nervous at one point or the other. So what can you narrate at least two episodes which made you very comfortable during the interview process, and other made you a little bit nervous?
So in terms of whether the questions were expected or not, there were never really any questions where I thought that, what have I been asked? Mostly the questions were such that I felt that they could be tackled, and maybe there were questions where I thought I didn't know the answer, so I would just say that I'm sorry sir, I am unaware, and we would move on. In terms of things that made me comfortable, generally there's a perception that these interviews are very stressful, it's a high stakes situation, but all my three interview experiences, what they've shown me is that the chairperson of the board, of the interview board, they go to great lengths to make us feel really comfortable. In my first interview, Chaube sir was the board was the chair of the panel, and he made me very comfortable. He said, he asked me about how I was feeling, then this is not akin to an interrogation, so you can relax and everything. Similarly, Manoj Soni sir, he had asked me a question in my second interview about the GI indicator, the GI tag for Rasagullas,
Okay.
because West Bengal is my
West
native
Bengal.
state. So,
Desi das and
and there was a conflict between Bengal and Orissa about it. So he asked me about that, and then he asked me, "Oh, do you eat rasagullas? Do you make rasagullas? Does your mother make?" So then those kind of informal questions, they made me feel very comfortable.
Okay.
So similarly, even unanswered went to great lengths to make you feel comfortable. So there were never really any negative experiences as such where I felt like I was nervous or I felt stuck. Generally, the vibe has always been very positive in all my 3 interviews.
That's great. Now, when on 30th May, the UPSC announced the exam final result and you stood second, so what were your dominant thoughts that passed through your mind?
I think first shock, just absolute shock. Second, there was a lot of relief because then something that I had started back in 2018 has finally culminated.
With not very positive note.
So there was that huge relief, and then when I spoke to only when I spoke to my parents that I feel like, okay, something really good has happened, because more than me it was my parents and my I spoke to my best friends, and the reactions were just it. So there were tears of happiness. There was a lot of shock and a lot of. It took me a lot of time to absorb that information.
Okay, that's great. Now, by securing All India Rank 2, you have revealed your strengths. Undoubtedly, implicitly though, you never mentioned that. But what were your weaknesses? Can you mention 2, 3?
I think one of my weaknesses is that I found that I can be most direct than I need to be. Sometimes I feel like I lack that little bit of diplomacy that you might need. And this is something that I've become aware of in the past few years, and I've been working on it. I think sometimes I'm quick to react. Pausing, sometimes that happens that I should pause before I say or do something. I find that sometimes that does not happen. Thirdly, I think I hold myself and other people to very strict standards, which does not take into account various different situations that people might be in, that I might be in. So I'm trying to be more empathetic in that sense, to be able to understand that I should not hold everybody to the same strict standards that I think are necessary.
Thank you. And before we let you go, Ankita, just one quick rapid round. What makes you happy?
I think, sir, just a lot of everyday things. I think it's what makes me happy is when if I wake up with enough time to read the newspaper and do my morning routine before I have to set out for work or for my classes, etc. So just having that time for myself in the morning, to be able to talk to my parents and my friends on time, to be in surroundings that are green and beautiful, just like very basic things that I can think of.
And what makes you angry?
What makes me angry? I think sometimes when I see people who don't do things that they are expected to do, that they promise that they'll do, I think sometimes that shirking of responsibility, I'm a little impatient on that front.
Okay. And what makes you sad?
What makes me sad? I think I feel when I see.
Okay, let us leave it. Can you recall which is the beautiful gift you have ever received from whom so far?
I really appreciate gifts which the person has put a lot of thought into, as in something that might that they realized that I might need. For example, my mains exam in 1 year fell about 20 days after my birthday. So my friends got me a care package where they got me pens and highlighters and sticky notes, and they got me snacks that I'll need for the next 20 days. They got me this pillow which I could put on my hand and sleep, take a short nap. So I think that was a very thoughtful gift. Then one of my friends gave me a Kindle, and being a very avid reader, and it was a Kindle with a backlight. So he realized that that is something I really needed. And so I think those things that I know that the person has been listening to me, that they know that I need that. I think those are some of the best gifts I've
That's
received.
wonderful. And during this journey of almost 4 years, because each cycle takes about 17 months, so 3 years, but then overlapping. So almost 4 years you must have spent. And during this journey, you must have suspended many pleasure-giving activities. Which one you thought is the most difficult to give up during this journey?
I think I reduced reading for pleasure because of the time constraints. So I read a little less than I would have liked, just for pleasure, storybooks and non-fiction, etc. So that is something I had to reduce when I was.
Ankita, a stimulating discussion. I'm sure many future aspirants will definitely benefit with your talks. My best wishes to you and our institute's best wishes to you for all your future endeavor. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Ankita.
so much. Thank you, sir.
Friends, we have Ankita with us. She had secured the All India Rank 2 in Civil Service Examination 2021.